In the spring of 1971, two small carved stone heads were uncovered during digging in a garden in Hexham, Northumberland. They lay close together in disturbed soil, wrapped in cloth and placed deliberately, suggesting that someone had buried them with care rather than dropping them as rubble. The find seemed ordinary at first. The heads were cleaned, examined and kept indoors as curiosities, without any sense that the house would change around them. Each head was roughly palm-sized, carved from local sandstone, with hollowed eyes and simplified features that gave them a blunt, mask-like expression under the light. One appeared more eroded, the other more sharply cut, with deeper grooves at the mouth and brow, as if the faces had once been meant to intimidate. No clear marker's mark was visible, and their surface showed staining and grit consistent with long burial, though this alone proved nothing about age. After cleaning, the heads were placed on shelves in living rooms and bedrooms, handled by families and visitors, passed from hand to hand without gloves. Within days, household members began mentioning night sounds, tapping, faint knocks, and a sense of movement in rooms where the heads were kept. The reports were small and repeatable rather than dramatic. Nothing broke, yet the timing and location were consistent enough to be discussed openly. Some described discomfort while holding the stones, headaches, nausea, and a prickling heat in the palms that eased after the heads were put down. Others reported sudden chills and a hard-to-name dread when walking past them, especially in dim corridors where the carved faces seemed to catch shadows. These reactions were recorded in conversation and later recollection, presented as personal experiences rather than proof, yet they fed a growing caution. Accounts that formed around displacement. The heads were said to be found turned, shifted, or repositioned between evenings and mornings, with no explanation offered. Sometimes they appeared to rotate to face a wall, at other times they sat further along a shelf, as if nudged by an unseen hand during the night. No one claimed to witness motion directly. The evidence remained the repeated discovery of altered placement and the unease that followed it. As weeks passed, louder disturbances were reported. Bangs against walls, objects falling nearby, and footsteps where no person stood, often after midnight. Electrical oddities were also mentioned, including flickering lights and radios changing volume in the same rooms, though such faults were common in older houses. The pattern, however, seemed tied to proximity. Activity clustered where the heads were stored, and eased when the stones were moved elsewhere. The heads were separated to test the effect, one placed upstairs, the other downstairs, kept apart so the household could note any change in disturbance. Reports suggested each object carried its own focus. Knocking followed one location, while a colder atmosphere was felt around the other. Separation did not end the problem. Instead, it spread the strain through the house, turning more rooms into places watched after dark. One head was removed from the property and given to another person for safekeeping, creating a second location where any reported effects could be compared. Disturbances were later said to occur in that new setting as well, night noises and uneasy sensations appearing after the stone arrived. Back at the original house, activity associated with the remaining head continued, which encouraged the belief that the stones mattered, not the building. As word travelled, local curiosity grew, and individuals with interests in archaeology and unusual phenomena asked to see the objects and hear accounts directly. Opinions diverged quickly. Some thought the carvings suggested antiquity, others suspected modern craft, while a few focused on the reported disturbances alone. Without formal excavation notes, the context of the burial remained uncertain, leaving the heads suspended between artifact, ornament, and troubling trigger, attempts were made to place the heads together again for observation, returning them to the same room to see whether proximity altered the pattern reported. Those present later described escalation, louder knocks, heavier bangs, and an oppressive feeling in the air, strongest when both heads faced outward together. The escalation was framed as cumulative rather than sudden, as if the household had been worn down by repeated nights and small shocks. Sleep disruption began shaping daily life. People avoided certain rooms. Lights were left on, and normal quiet evenings became periods of listening and waiting. Family members reportedly argued over where the stones should be kept, not from superstition alone, but from exhaustion and the need for calm routine. Here the haunting, if that word is used at all, appeared as pressure on ordinary domestic order, altering behaviour through persistent disturbance. Researchers documented statements and timelines, noting how accounts clustered around handling, placement, and the hours after dark when activity was most reported. Some witnesses spoke of dreams marked by faces and stone, waking with a sense of presence, then finding the heads turned or closer than before. These details were recorded as testimony, not certainty. The story advanced through people's recollections and the way those recollections aligned. Questions then turned to origin. Suggestions ranged from Romano-British influence to later folk carving, yet no laboratory dating resolved the matter clearly. Surface weathering and tool marks were interpreted differently depending on the observer, and the heads lacked a secure archaeological layer to anchor them. In this uncertainty, the objects gained power through narrative. The less known about their making, the more weight fell onto what was reported around them. Eventually the heads were removed from domestic spaces and placed into storage where contact was limited, aiming to restore quiet and reduce anxiety. Reports from that period suggested disturbances diminished once the stones were no longer handled daily, though accounts varied between individuals involved. Distance appeared to change the atmosphere. Whether through relief or reality, the household regained routine when the heads were absent. Over time, the heads passed between custodians, sometimes kept wrapped and sealed, sometimes placed in containers to prevent casual handling by visitors. Those who stored them often described a preference for separation from bedrooms and living spaces, treating them as items requiring containment. Such choices reflected reported experience rather than doctrine. People acted on what they believed had happened, and belief itself shaped the record. In later years, investigators revisited the case, collating testimonies, sketches and photographs, then tracking how the story changed as they were retold. Some accounts emphasised physical phenomena like knocks and movement. Others emphasised feelings of dread and a sense of being watched near the stones. Disagreement remained part of the file. The case survived through repetition, not resolution, with each retelling selecting different details to foreground. The term Hexham Heads became fixed as shorthand, turning two small objects into a named event within local memory and wider paranormal circles. Naming created coherence. It grouped scattered incidents into a single narrative, making it easier to recall, share, and believe as a connected sequence. In that way, the heads functioned as anchors. Whatever they were, they gave shape to fear, attention, and the idea that something followed them. Questions about the original burial returned repeatedly. Why wrap them? Why hide them in a garden? And why place the two heads together at all? Some speculated about ritual disposal, others about concealment after mischief, yet no period document surfaced to confirm any motive decisively. The burial remained the quiet starting point, an action in soil with no witness, leaving later generations to infer intent from aftermath alone. Descriptions of the faces often focused on the eyes, hollow sockets that caught darkness, making the heads appear to stare even when unlit. At night, Such forms can alter perception, small shadows become movement, and ordinary creaks gain meaning when attention is fixed on an object. Within the house, the heads were not just seen, they were anticipated, and anticipation itself shaped what sounds were noticed and remembered. Yet several reports included incidents away from expectation, knocks occurring when no one spoke of the heads, or disturbances reported by visitors. These accounts were important to those involved because they seemed to weaken the idea of suggestion, though they still remained anecdotal evidence. In documentation, the case rests on such moments, events said to occur without prompting, recorded later in statements and correspondence. At times the heads were described as heavy with atmosphere, a phrase used to mean the room felt thick, quiet and reluctant, as if holding breath. People reported speaking more softly near them, moving carefully and avoiding direct eye contact with the carved faces, despite knowing they were stone. Behaviour changed first, then interpretation followed. The domestic environment adjusted around two small objects and the reports attached to them. Storage did not end curiosity. When the heads were brought out for examination, those present watched for recurrence, noting any noises and timing. Some later claimed activity returned briefly during such periods, then faded again once the heads were sealed away, reinforcing ideas of attachment. Each cycle reported the same structure: contact, disturbance, withdrawal, relief, creating a rhythm that became part of the case history. Across years, the story persisted through letters, interviews, and investigator notes, forming a paper trail that preserved voices more than events. Dates and names mattered because they fixed testimony to real people and places, even when the phenomena described could not be measured directly. In that record, certainty remains limited. What survives is a pattern of reported experience clustered around two carved heads from one garden. Hexham itself returned to quiet. The garden was filled back in, daily life continued, and the heads became portable symbols rather than local fixtures. The community memory did not require constant incidents. It required only the initial discovery and the sense that something followed the objects. Stories of the heads lingered like residue, repeated not because they ended neatly, but because they never truly settled into explanation. In the end, the Hexham Heads remained small, ordinary stones by weight and size, yet enlarged by the chain of reactions recorded around them. Whether the disturbances were environmental, psychological, or something stranger in the telling, the accounts insist on one detail: proximity mattered. The record closes without a final answer. Two faces carved in sandstone, lifted from soil and carried onward through memory and unsettled nights.